Chapter 9. Dare propped herself up against the wall, staring at the plate of food on the blanket in front of her, and wondering when dinner had happened. She shifted against the stiffness of the bed's straw mattress. Twilight seeped through the window. She chewed on her lip. I didn't faint. I tripped and hit my head on a rock or something. Kelin looked up from his own plate of mutton, vegetables, and bread. You've no idea how much blood you lost, do you? He kicked off his boots and sat beside her. They'd found an inn at the crossroads. It had plain wooden walls and a candle sitting in the glassless windowsill. A heavy leather curtain hung over the opening. They'd paid for a private room, but it was cramped and contained only one bed. She shrugged. Not enough to keep me down. She tasted a bite of her mutton. He frowned. You can pretend you're invincible to yourself all you want, but don't you dare lie to me. She half smiled. I'm serious, Dare. You always are. He dropped his eyes. Caleb saved your life. He's incredible. I don't think I could have. He twisted his fingers together. I'm sorry. Kelin, you would have. Thanks. But he shook his head. Where is Caleb, anyway? Kelin glanced toward the door. Out getting clothes. He said the innkeeper's daughter is a seamstress, and I desperately hope that she already has some made, or this could take a couple days. She nodded. He blew out a sigh. I should have stayed home. She chuckled. I think you just want to go see a vice. He sighed, but a grin wound around his mouth. Maybe. But I am thankful you haven't said anything. She smirked. No, although I was about to poke you in the back with a sword to make you do it yourself. You would have to. He stole a small piece of bread from her plate. Did I ever tell you that a vice thought you and I should... Well, you can guess. Dare blinked, tilted her head, and blinked again. Oh, that's not something I'd expect her to say. She leaned away from him. We grew up together. Your mother watched me more than my own when we were little. I know, I know. And why would I ever get married, especially with all the great adventures out here? What about you? What do you think? He pressed his fingertips together. How do I put this politely? You're more of a drinking partner. And you know I want to settle down somewhere with my own forge, a small garden, and make a life for a family. You mean like children? She gave him a look as if he had started speaking another language. Yes, Dare. He dipped his head into his hands, but smiled. This is why I say you're more of a drinking partner. Because after talking with you, I want a drink. She frowned. Speaking of... She raised an empty mug. Is there any more? For you, there's water. And I checked. It's clean. Thanks. A whispered knock rapped on the door before it swung inward. Kelin clicked his mouth closed. Caleb entered, holding a small pile of folded clothes. She caught his gaze. Oh, good. Dare, you're awake. How are you feeling? Tired and dizzy? He set the clothes on the bed. An honest answer. She dug her shoulder blades into the wall in an effort to find a position where her head wasn't spinning. Do you think anyone will find us here? Caleb exhaled slowly. I hope not. But they were waiting on the road. Yeah, for anyone, Kelin said. To rob them. Dare shook her head. No, for us. Caleb pressed his lips together. I saw Senna's mark. Perhaps someone who saw us in Dulingar gathered together more cultists and waited for us. But it's also likely they were just waiting for anyone. They are bastards like that, but there are bigger bastards out there. Like the outlaw? Dare pushed herself up straighter. That makes sense. Why would they bother hunting us when he's obviously such a heftier prize? Caleb lowered himself onto a corner of the bed and sagged. Because they're after me. She frowned. But I thought they were hunting the outlaw. He looked at her and raised an eyebrow. Kelin glanced down. Oh. It took Dare another moment. Oh! Kelin grunted. So, Dare, are you going to arrest him? She shook her head. No. Not if those evil men are hunting him too. Her expression warmed and she looked at Caleb. And you barely know us, so I have to honor this trust in us. A brief struggle crossed his features, and his face fell. You shouldn't die because of me. He paled as he spoke, and his hands fell limp against his thighs. But I'm just surprised that strangers can be so kind. And I've rewarded it with injury and fleeing. What if our wounds become infected? There's nothing I can do. I don't know any songs of healing. Songs of what? Kelin echoed. But Caleb wasn't listening. They lied. He drew his knees to his chest. They sold such a convincing untruth to all the spies and nobles. You're saying the cultists lied and set up this bounty on you? Dare frowned in confusion. He glared ahead. No. Oh, you mean their god. What? Caleb shook his head. No. Something a bit more tangible. She squirmed. The voice had been tangible enough. She inhaled and straightened her shoulders. Then she looked at Caleb. What can we do to help you? Kelin gently shoved her shoulder. What could we possibly do? She folded her arms. I'm sure we can figure out something. Caleb seemed to fight a small smile before it faded. Wait. Dare raised a hand. Master Niran said this involved the elves. How does that fit? Caleb rose and straightened his tunic. Then he reached up and poked the cap. It slithered off his head, pulling his hair over his face as it slipped free. He pushed back his platinum locks to reveal his ears. They were the same size as a human's, but came to a simple point. The two villagers gawped at the elf, speechless. He dropped his chin to his chest. Yes, I'm the outlaw, but I've done no crime. I'm hiding, running, and I'm terrified. He sucked in a shaky breath. What happened? Kelin whispered. Caleb shook his head and stared at his hands. I was so weary that I was becoming clumsy. We had fled our home all the way out here. Nothing was safe, and I lost sight of my little brother, and I fell. So far. I was already cold before I hit the water. I'm so sorry, Kelin whispered. Dare tapped her chin. What are you running from if it's not the cult? He shook his head as he pressed the cap against his face. His knees quivered, and he sank to the floor. I'm not sure how I wake up each morning, or how I fall asleep at night. He gasped as if he were drowning, pulling the cap away. He stared at the hat in his hand like he'd never seen it before. It can't be real. It's too foreign. I can't make myself understand. Dare eased closer to him. Understand what, Caleb? He wiped his eyes against his sleeve. I can't say it. He twisted toward them. How do you live with death? How can you go on when your loved ones are forever gone? My parents... Kelin squirmed in his seat. It takes a while. He glanced to Dare for support. She pulled the handkerchief out from her belt purse and gazed at her sister's needlework. The flowers shone in the candlelight. What would she do if something happened to her family? She pushed the thought away and passed the cloth over to Caleb. Here. Without a word, he took it into his hands and wiped his cheeks. She said, It helps to talk about the good things, what they did for you and how your life is better from loving them. At least, that's what my dad said to me. Kelin slid off the bed and sat on the floor next to Caleb. You have to realize that life didn't end for the rest of the world. Nor for you. Caleb shook his head. I know that, but I don't believe it. Because it's not something that comes immediately. My mother told me that their memories become alive in you, so they're not really gone. Caleb huffed. Dare cleared her throat. We know your parents were good people because you're a good person. You wouldn't have risked your life to help us against those cultists. Twice, if you weren't. Caleb shook his head as tears slipped from his eyes. This is just making it real again. He hid his face behind the handkerchief. Then he seemed to sink in behind it as he stared down at the floor. He dropped the cloth. Dare glanced to see what he was looking at. The boards were thick, scraped, and stained by many years of use, and he was studying every crack in them. She licked her lips. You'd said something about meeting someone at the Count's. He looked away, but his shoulders relaxed. The master cook. She cracked a grin. We wouldn't mind seeing him too. She patted her stomach. Dare, this is serious. Kelin tossed whatever food was left on his plate at her lap. He's the... Dare wiped carrots off her trousers. Don't yell it. Caleb replaced his cap on his head and pulled his hair over his ears. Quiet, both of you. He scraped off the vegetables from the bed. And Kelin, throw the pillow next time, please. Kelin narrowed his eyes at Dare. We are beyond pillows. Dare nodded. Yeah, ever since that time I hid toads in his. Caleb opened his mouth. What? But instead, he looked away with a hint of a smile. If you two are friends, then I don't want to be your enemy. Now, let's try to sleep. You may use a carrot in place of a pillow if you wish. He offered Dare the embroidered cloth back. She shook her head. Keep it.